Thank you, Chair. Yes, there are 4 statements, and I'll start with the statement of the applicant. This is the applicant's supporting statement of Mr. Ball, Planning Director at Gladman Developments Limited. I would begin by expressing my thanks to members for the opportunity to provide this statement. I also extend my thanks to officers for the time they have dedicated to considering this application. The advice that has been provided from pre-application stage through to today has always been of the highest professional standard. The application site is a strategic housing allocation under policy SP21 of the Thanet Local Plan. As will be noted from our submission, although the allocation expected the site could accommodate 550 homes, our application proposes up to 450. The reduced quantity of housing is a necessary response to enable us to accommodate site constraints alongside site infrastructure. In preparing our proposals, we have kept site delivery at the forefront of our thinking. Master planning has occurred iteratively as key evidence has become available. All notable findings have been relayed to relevant officers from Thanet Council and Kent County Council at the earliest opportunity. Given the extent of evidence that has informed our submission, we have the utmost confidence that the plans before you are deliverable and have agreed to conditions that require future applications to accord with these principles. It is, of course, important to acknowledge that delivery leads not only to new housing, but also a new link road, which is an important component of the inner circuit road improvement scheme that will bring wider strategic benefits, plus creating a bypass around Coffin House Corner. It is because of these benefits we have spent additional time satisfying ourselves that the alignment and the geometry of the road can be achieved, and have carried out significant engagement with Kent County Highway Authority. As set out within the officer report, we have committed to entering into a legal agreement that safeguards the internal route corridor of the link road. The agreement also safeguards further land in the west of the site that can be drawn on by the County Council if it is successful securing major road network funding. Unfortunately, the engineering challenge of delivering the link road comes with abnormal costs that have had to be considered alongside other contribution requests. We have been open about the effect of these costs on our submitted viability appraisal. The appraisal has been confirmed by the Council's independent expert, who agrees that the affordable housing proposed results in a deficit in the benchmark land value. To effectively balance viability against the potential future funding of the link road by Kent County Council, we have worked with officers to agree on an infrastructure pot that will allow Kent to determine where requested contribution funds are best directed. We have also agreed to a review mechanism that would enable county contributions to be topped up in the event it is successful in securing MRN funding. That's major road network funding. There will also be a separate review that will capture changes in development viability, with any identified surplus then channeled towards off-site affordable housing. We have worked collaboratively with officers to bring you this application today. We fully endorse their recommendation and hope you can too. Just excuse me a moment, Chairman. Right, this is the second statement, and it is a statement objecting to the application from Mr. Dickman, Vice Chair, Salmestone Ward Residents Association. And he says, I am seeking to oppose planning application OLTH200847 on the following grounds. Highways and ecology. Highways. Manston, Shottenden are main arteries into Margate, especially for tourists. Developments at Salmestone and Manston, Shottenden will increase traffic flow exponentially. Manston Road is unique as it has a school, crematorium, graveyard, and the public refuge centre all within 800 metres of each other, thus being a highway for a high level of local traffic. This combined with holiday traffic often results in Manston Road becoming gridlocked at various times throughout the year. I feel that the proposed changes in traffic routes and the increase in traffic will inevitably have a negative effect on local residents, the community wishing to use the vital amenities and tourism on Thanet. Ecology. Along with the proposed development in the field adjacent to Salmestone Grange, there will be a total of 700 houses stretching down from the high ground at Salmestone into the valley of the field at the northwest of Shottenden Road. I have a major concern that the extra water from 700 roofs, drain pipes and hard surfaces will inevitably find its way to the lowest point in the valley. As the Tivoli Brook runs through the valley and is joined by a confluence of other brooks, I believe that there is a very real risk of flooding, which is borne out by previous history. Perhaps my greatest concern is that the brook eventually empties into the Margate main sands, and a large influx of water from residential dwellings, combined with nitrates from the existing fields, could well have a detrimental effect on the coastal water quality. In my view, this development potentially contravenes the recommendations in the National Planning Policy Framework. Section 14, subsection 166, brackets, meeting the challenge of climate change, flooding and coastal change, close brackets, and section 15, subsection 170, brackets, conserving and enhancing the natural environment, close brackets. Can we please ensure that a verification report has been carried out on the effect of surface water by an independent and qualified professional, as my greatest fear is that this development could have a catastrophic effect on Thanet's tourist industry, which our growth is dependent on. Rowan Dickman. Okay, there is now a statement objecting to the application from Mrs. Channing. I am writing to object to the above planning application on two separate grounds: common sense and social responsibility / conscience. Firstly, in terms of common sense and practicality, a development of this size and in this position makes very little sense. The loss of prime agricultural land, made even more important by our choice to leave the EU and seek homegrown produce, as well as land which supports a range of flowers and animals, must surely be protected. In addition, there have been no less than 3 new developments started or completed in less than a mile of Shottenden Road in the past 5 years. And of those not yet completed, at the top and bottom of Nash Road, it is my understanding that these have not all been sold off plan. How can the developer and the council justify the need for additional housing when we are already offering these resources elsewhere? Secondly, and just as significantly, I object to the development on the grounds of social and moral conscience. Having worked in teaching in the local areas for the majority of my life, I can see firsthand the levels of poverty and deprivation that students and their families encounter in the local area, one of the most deprived wards in Kent. I can see that the developer has made a cursory mention of access points, public outdoor space and a play area. Where is their, or indeed the council's, if this is approved, commitment to supporting local infrastructure, transportation, services, education? Approximately 1,800 new residents in Thanet. As we know that in the current climate and due to the levels of deprivation mentioned in the local area above, that the people of Thanet will not be able to take advantage of this new development, or they would have already done so in the other developments already on offer, will be using these already stretched and struggling services. Finally, it is the responsibility of the council to ensure that the needs of the existing community of Thanet is best served. I am yet to find any compelling evidence that developments of this sort and in this sort of position benefit anyone in the local community. Rather, this development would destroy a piece of much needed green space in an area already overserved with housing developments of this sort, as well as disadvantaging the people of Thanet still further by increasing competition for employment, of which we already have the dubious honour of having most adults unemployed in the county of Kent, saturating the local schools and amenities and placing further strain on health and social care in the community. I can see all these issues arising from approval for this development and not one concrete advantage to the community living there. I would urge the council to reject this proposal based on the above grounds and to keep the needy in our community already in their minds and hearts. And finally, there is a statement objecting to the application from Mr. Woodward. He says, This development is in the local character area, the Thanet undulating chalk farmland. This is described in the local plan as an area of high quality agricultural land of value for farmland and roosting coastal birds. The openness and undeveloped character of the farmland contributes to the essentially rural character and relatively dark skies. Also, a part of the national character area, the North Kent Plains, Natural England quotes, Thanet forms a discrete and a distinct area characterised by its unity of land use arising from high-quality fertile soils. Open with few trees, the area is dominated by wide views over an extensive land cover of cereals, root crops and other horticultural crops. It states that we need to manage and enhance the productive agricultural landscape, including support for the area's farmland birds, and that it will be more important to safeguard high-quality agricultural land in development planning. It adds that future development should seek to protect and enhance the assets which provide a strong sense of place. Increasing sense of history could lead to increased sense of place by reinforcing the historic character of the landscape. This landscape is vital for food production and protected farmland birds, including those identified by DEFRA, the lapwing, redshank and corn bunting, and the infamous skylarks. It forms part of a functional land key for the coastal birds of the protected SPA/SSSI coast. It is also the last part of central Thanet with relatively dark skies, supporting 6 species of protected bats and species of protected owls. This area provides tranquility and open space, vital for mental health. Footpath TM14 on the boundary of the development is on adjacent land, currently an open countryside enjoyed by many. Thanet's heritage is based on thousands of years of farming. Farming is the fabric of our landscape. If this plan gets approved, all of this will change. By not engaging with local farmers throughout the planning process and by not considering the current use of land and the economic viability of the farmer who is producing food on these 2 fields in question, the central character area is likely to lose current farming practice, eroding the current benefits it provides. This development is viewed in isolation, but is connected to Birchington and Westgate's planned 1,650 and 2,000 houses via the Inner Circuit Road development and Section 106 payments. All these developments are in the same character area and combined will lead to a loss of 30 to 40% of the high quality farmland which as stated should be safeguarded. The housing, street lit roads and roundabouts associated with this development will remove the last patch of dark skies in the area, currently vital for protected species including bats and little owls. As mentioned in agenda item 3A, page 35 to 37, the remaining central farmland will be carved up by road improvements, footpath and bridleway upgrades. All of this is on land owned by the same farmer who farms the Shuttenden fields. None of this has been assessed. We know because the farmer has never been consulted. If farms become unviable, this landscape and its functionality will change. It is that simple. The following policies are affected by this proposal. Policy SP 14.5, General Housing Policy regarding assessment and mitigation of functional land for roosting and feeding birds. Policy SP 28, regarding the protection of the international and European designated sites. Policy SP 30, regarding restoration and enhancement of existing habitats and mitigation against the loss of farmland bird habitats. There is no provision for this. Policy SP 31, Biodiversity Opportunity Areas, owned by farmers whose viability is affected. Investment on their part to enhance biodiversity will come into question. Policy SE08, light pollution. This will be impact on the character of the surroundings and on protected and vulnerable species due to increased traffic and street lights in the last dark part of Thanet. Policy SP 34. The wider countryside will be reduced. This will impact recreation and enjoyment of the current population. Policy SP 36, Conservation and Enhancement of Thanet's Historic Environment. Farming, farmland and its unique soils is Thanet's historic environment. It is being lost. Policy SP 38, Healthy and Inclusive Communities. Access to nature will not be improved. Finally, Policy SP 26 states that the Council will identify and support opportunities to conserve Thanet's landscape character and local distinctiveness, including that of the central part of the district with a sense of openness and big skies. Developments should demonstrate how they will conserve and enhance Thanet's local distinctiveness. Should this development go ahead, the damage will be irreparable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Suki. Well done, thank you. Normally, members, as you're fully aware, when we're in normal times, speakers would only have 3 minutes. Now we have, or I have, sort of waived that rule over the past 12 months. I know we have speakers under 20.1 coming up. I will do similar, but I will keep an eye on the time and try not to repeat what each other, if I make sense there. So I want to be fair with everyone on timing. So first of all, if I may call Ward Councillor, Councillor Gregory.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 points. My first point is Thanet District Council declared a climate emergency in July 2019, and TDC resolved to address the loss and reduction of agricultural land to address plant and animal diseases. And TDC stated, "We are running out of time before these changes become irreversible. We can still do something about it, but we have to start to act now. That's what makes it an emergency." These are TDC's words. Point 2. The legal agreement submitted in support of this application contains this commitment: £388,800 towards creating capacity at the Limes medical practice or within the primary care network. This is the cost of one of the proposed new houses, but while that money may provide bricks, it won't provide the staff needed for the Limes to function with the extra patients for this development. The clinical commissioning group for the Limes catchment area in this proposal alone estimates 1,080 new patient registrations. The CCG state there must be appropriate medical service capacity, and any planned developments need to support delivery of sustainable services for the future. Currently, the UK has 2.8 doctors per thousand of population, and this is well below the EU average, and the situation is worsening. The Royal College of GPs identified Kent as particularly deprived of GPs, needing at least a 50% increase in GP numbers to cope with the population changes and shortage of doctors. Kent currently has around 850 GPs. 24.4% of them are over the age of 55, and some will consider early retirement. Since 2019, the Royal College of GPs cite a 3.7% drop in their numbers of full-time GPs since 2015. The last National GP Work-Life Survey reported that 2 out of every 5 GPs intend to leave in the next 5 years. If this development goes ahead, having an additional 1,080 patients will add an extra burden of stress on an already stressed workforce, making early retirement even more attractive. Together with the GP shortages is the government's Sustainability and Transformation Plan, which proposes a 10% reduction in hospital beds by 2021. For Kent, this is 300 fewer beds. You will have already noticed many services cut from QEQM with patients travelling further afield. There are no local incentive schemes in Kent to encourage healthcare professionals to come to Thanet, and to turn Thanet into one unsightly urban sprawl will not entice professionals when they could be rewarded elsewhere with a better environment and better staffed medical facilities. There's also currently 46,000 registered nurse vacant posts. Vacancies go unfilled at the local hospitals, putting pressure on the existing workforce. And stress and low-paying conditions see a huge staff turnover. With this proposal and other developments waiting in the wings, Our local residents' health needs cannot be met with an influx of new residents. To misquote a former Prime Minister, there is no magic GP tree, there is no magic registered nurse tree. To ensure the safety and health needs of our residents, I urge the Planning Committee to reject this development's application. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Gregory. Speaking also as Ward Councillor, Councillor Farrance.
Thank you, Chair. Along with my ward residents, I have many concerns about this development, including the loss of arable land, green spaces and our valuable wildlife. And this last year has ensured we're all very well aware of the importance of green spaces to our mental health and well-being. But the affordable housing quota has been reduced to only 10% on this development, apparently down to the high cost and complexity of the required infrastructure, drainage, roads, etc., due to so many difficulties involved in building on this land. Does this indicate that the land isn't suitable for a housing development in Thanet when we all know we need as much affordable housing as possible? And it's sending a very risky signal to future developers if we agree to only 10% affordable housing, whatever the reason. Thanet needs as much affordable housing as possible. But I also want to question the basis of the viability studies which support the 10% affordable housing. The viability assessment in Annex 1, published last June, points out that due to the pandemic, transaction values, and I quote, have fallen to unprecedented levels, and there is a demonstrable correlation between such volumes falling and a reduction in values. The viability assessment is predicated on present day values. Nearly a year ago, we all know that the housing market has improved considerably since that time, particularly the demand for homes by the sea. So an assessment undertaken nearly a year ago must be reviewed. It may well reveal that 30% affordable housing is now viable. And the assessment actually states itself that, quote, any improvement in the sales value assumptions would most likely be reflected in an improvement in scheme viability. And my second point is I have to mention GP provision, a few different angles to Councillor Gregory. Our residents are very concerned about this. This is a topic that comes up so much. So there was a meeting of the Kent and Medway Clinical Commissioning Group, the CCG, last week. And they actually said that the Thanet GP system was fragile and was struggling with the low number of GPs. Now, I've been asking the Limes and the CCG to prioritise attracting more GPs to Thanet for the last 2 years. They tell me they've tried everything and it's been impossible. The CCG has steadfastly refused to consider offering incentives, they say they can't, such as enhanced payments or golden handshakes. Any sort of incentives that we could encourage more GPs to Thanet hasn't been taken up. Specifically, the Limes in Margate has approximately 5,000 patients per GP, compared to a national average of 1,800, nearly 3 times as much. This proposed development, on top of the other new 250 houses planned for Salmestone, is in the Limes catchment area. They say there'll be 1,080 new patients based on an occupancy of only 2.4 people per dwelling. The developers can contribute to an extension at the Limes, but how are they going to recruit more doctors? That is the crucial question. We simply cannot agree to our population increasing overall in Thanet by up to 50,000 people without any more medical provision. Councillor Gregory has talked about the hospital angle of this, also, of course, vital. So we must insist that the Kent and Medway CCG take action to address the shortage of GPs in Thanet before any more housing developments can be agreed. I therefore ask you to reject this application, or at least ensure that such a major decision for Thanet is not delegated to officers but comes back to our elected members on the Planning Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Farrance. And I call upon Councillor Boyd, who's speaking under Council Procedure 20.1. Councillor Boyd.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for letting me speak. I'll be brief as much as possible. I'm here today basically because I'm quite concerned about how much green infrastructure is going to be impeded and the lack of green infrastructure placed into this plan. The field's actually back onto my house, so I see it every day, and obviously it backs onto my ward personally. There is a very good separation of settlements where this land is. I think it's fair to say that piece of land, the residents there do not feel part of the suburb, do not feel part of the town, and I think this will merge the barriers quite considerably. My colleagues have already mentioned things about wildlife. It's quite a dark area. The health and well-being of the bats is quite a concern. But also the mental well-being of ourselves, so being able to use cycle paths and being able to go on those walks. The design itself, although they said, yes, we've got green land, just to simply put a patch of green land in the corner of a development is not good enough, because you've still got a built-up area around all of that plans. And something else I would pick up on is where you've got a children's play area, great, which is overlooked by all of these houses, but what about the teenagers? All you're going to get is a lot of gathering, because it's not going to be good enough, it's not going to be substantial. There's big cries out now for stuff for teenagers to do in Margate, for example, skate parks and all sorts of stuff like that, and this plan simply does not cover it. So I think it's quite unfair for it to be passed, oh, it's okay because we've got something for 5 to 8 year olds. Because at the end of the day, you're just going to get people that live there with teenagers who have got nowhere else to go, so they're going to sit there, they're not going to cause any harm, but those residents overlooking the play area will then start calling us up to complain and thinking that it's antisocial behaviour, when pretty frankly, there's nothing else for them to do. So they're going to be victimised in that respect. But I just think that it's quite a shame that we are looking at getting rid of our green areas and having that divide, particularly when we look at green wedges which are protected in other areas of Thanet. Why are they not protected over in this little corner of Thanet? So that's all I've got to say, and I'll pass over to the next person. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Boyd. I now call upon Councillor Pugh, who's going to speak under Council Procedure 20.1. And also, if I may, I do know that Councillor Pugh and I believe other members of the committee are aware. Councillor Pugh has been given a statement which I have allowed for part of it to be read out. So, Councillor Pugh.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good evening to members of the Planning Committee. I'll try and be brief. I understand that this is going to be a long meeting, but of course it's important that you hear not only my views, but the views of my residents. To provide some context, this site borders my ward, saying that, you know, almost all wards border the Thanet Villages ward nonetheless, as Councillor Hart will attest to. But most importantly, there's a small section just south of this site where there's a collection of houses. Those residents there are my residents in my ward, and some of them are gravely concerned about this application for a variety of reasons, particularly the adverse impact that runoff water and flooding would have of this development. But I want to touch on a few matters and a few issues to begin with, namely that I'm quite and greatly concerned that not only has this plan application been submitted for less than the total number has been allocated within the local plan, with how much work went into the local plan and how much a struggle that was, and the general strength of feeling that residents have with the allocated housing numbers, for it to not only be put forward for less numbers, and then for the applicant to argue that the affordable housing percentage should be dropped from 30% to 10%, I think quite honestly is an outrage. You know, particularly in an area where we need more affordable housing, that's evident. It's quite clear. We've already had a re-examination on the application that you all decided on last week for Minster, where the landowner or land applicant had campaigned for a 10% affordable. Instead, it was revised back up to 30%. What's most important is that with our local plan, and it's been muted with this, I'm sure, as it was muted with the point was made with the application in Minster last week, is that this land is included in the local plan. There's no doubt about that. No one is arguing anything other than that. Of course, it's allocated in the local plan as a strategic site. We get that. However, I think it's quite important, the planning inspectorate has accepted our local plan, and it's accepted this site as well to be allocated, if it's developed, for 30% affordable housing. So the fact that this applicant is now put forward only 10% affordable, I think is more than enough grounds to refuse permission. I mean, heck, I'd go to say if you accepted that you refused permission right now, I'd stop speaking. But I'm going to use up all of my my allocation, I'm sure. Another point that's been said is that, yes, it is in the local plan. Well, of course, this site is included in the local plan, but surely we as councillors and you as the committee, we have a duty to ensure that any application that's put forward for this site is the best that it can be. And quite honestly, I don't think this is. So regardless of whether it's in the local plan, I think that we have a duty to ensure that it's the best it is. And because this isn't, I think that you should, of course, refuse it. Namely as well, and I think something else that I mentioned before, but I'll mention again at this meeting of the planning committee, is that we're not hitting our targets for the annual delivery of housing. That's clearly not something that is our fault as the council. It's not a failing that we've made, because we're granting permissions left, right and centre for quite large, considerable sites, and we have thousands and thousands of units that are waiting to be built. But one thing that I'd like to draw to the attention of the planning committee is that we annually are under-delivering our annual housing target. Namely, I think last year we only delivered circa about 50%. So, you know, the idea that we'd continue to keep granting planning permission just because this site is included in the local plan, I think is nonsense. And I think, honestly, we're doing a disservice to residents. Not only that, but close to this site, and some members will recall, around about this time last year, I think it was, or in the summer or September, there was land close to this site that was suggested by the council to be used as a site for a temporary traveller site. I think particularly the amount of strength of feeling that was felt locally against that, and the reasons, for various reasons, why it was then not considered. I doubt very much that a new development would take quite likely to potentially be sited next to a temporary traveller site, in the same way that residents in Garninge and the villages were concerned that that farmland was being put forward for it. Namely that, and this is something that I should have mentioned at the beginning, but I'll mention now. There was a petition that was started up that I think all members of the planning committee have now been shared with this morning, that was only started on Friday, that I think really shows the strength of feeling of local residents that they do not want this application to be granted permission. In the space of 3 or 4 days, I think it's launched on Friday afternoon, it's now got over 3,000 signatures, which is no small order over the space of a weekend. I know it's lockdown, but I think that that's incredibly important, and that the committee should take note of that. And finally, and thank you, Chair, for allowing me to read out part of a statement, but a resident of mine, Jonathan Tapp, who is the owner of Hatfield Farm, who have farmed this land for 200-300 years. I've got a section of his objection, which I believe was already included as part of the formal consultation process, and which I shared with members of the committee just before this meeting, so that you have a full copy of it. But I'd like to share out his concerns, and I think it shares the frustration that's felt locally, in that really this is just the tip of the iceberg, and that if this application is granted permission, it can open up a whole swathe of farmland, you know, in the centre of Thanet, that would just be decimated and destroyed, not only by development, but by infrastructure improvements and roads. And particularly what I would say is not only the widening of Shottendane Road, because there's sections along Shottendane Road that you can't widen because there's houses on both sides, but also the carving up of farmland for... Councillor
Pugh, please, would you come to the statement, please?
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. I certainly will. So this is just an excerpt of Mr. Tapp's statement. This proposal is in the wrong place. It is not delivering the correct social infrastructure, no jobs, leisure or culture. It is completely car dependent. It destroys productive farmland, which has a history of farming dating many centuries before the Romans arrived. It reduces the hunting area for many raptor species here, including buzzards, kestrels, little owls, barn owls, and more recently, red kites. It reduces the area available for hares, partridges, skylarks, and sparrows. It endangers the viability of my farming business which has been in the same family for 2 centuries. It should be rejected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pugh, and I did let you go on there, and I don't want other members to think that they didn't have the opportunity. I would have let yourselves. That concludes public speaking and speaking from members of the public, which members have heard. Now I'm going to hand over to officers to give their report, namely Ian Livingston, Annabelle Hemmings, and James Wright, who I mentioned earlier on, is KCC Highways. So I'll pass over to you, Ian.